All right, guys, today we're going to talk about some strategies for critical reading. I think that study skills and reading strategies are a really important piece of what we help you develop in school, and it was not something that I was good at as a student. So I want to kind of help you, and we build that into our curriculum. So today we're going to talk about some critical reading strategies in any context, but specifically looking at science or current event articles that we're relating back to science. So this is a Cornell sort of setup for notes. So this will be your first experience with a video lecture. So what I'm going to do is walk through 4 strategies that we will always use, and then a couple of other strategies that you could use if you were looking to differentiate or seek out some more information within the text. So the first strategy that we're always going to use is to number our paragraphs. This makes it easy to reference back into the article later on. If you were doing an analysis of something or if you were working in a group, you could simply direct someone to see paragraph 12. So we're going to number each of our paragraphs. The next thing that we are always going to do is that we are going to circle key vocabulary. So we may be reading an article and you're looking for vocab we're using in the unit, or I may give you a certain set of things to look for. So as you're reading, you're going to circle key vocabulary, and this may include important people. So if we're talking about forces, you may include references to Newton, or maybe we're looking for names of scientists. The next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to underline the author's claims that relate to the purpose of the article. So we might be reading an article about climate change, and the author is going to make a very specific claim about the impact of carbon footprints. And so this is not something you shouldn't have a ton of underlining in your article, because we're just doing claims. And then the last thing that we are always going to do is that we are going to highlight big or main ideas. So one thing, especially when we get into some dense science reading, is that you're supposed to highlight the important stuff. And what happens is that you get going and suddenly everything feels important, and so we end up with an entire page full of yellow highlighted pieces, and it's not really narrowing it down. So in general, you're going to highlight any big or main ideas, which is probably limited to 1 sentence or so per paragraph. So one way to think about it is if you were to annotate an article and then give it to a partner, and we ask that partner to skim your reading, they should be able to just read your highlighted pieces in a couple of minutes and have a general idea of what the article is and maybe have some questions to ask you. So you're going to highlight more than you underline, but there still shouldn't be a ton of highlighting. So these are the 4 things that we will always do. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you a couple of ideas for other ways that you can differentiate information and to make your reading more effective. So we've gone over some strategies that I want you to do every time. Now I'm going to give you a couple of other strategies that you can use as they work for you. I'm going to tell you what I use them for, but you can certainly kind of define what these things do for your reading. One thing that you can do is to bracket, put these little spots around pieces of information. So when I do critical reading, I use brackets to pull out any data or evidence that the author provides in support or their claim or purpose. So I put a bracket around key numbers, maybe reference materials that they use, anything that they're using to support their claim or purpose. So initially, our plan was to circle key vocabulary maybe from the unit we're in. Another way to maybe track a different set of terms is instead of circle would just be to box them. So we might box old vocabulary, maybe from a previous unit. You could also maybe box words that you don't know or you've never heard before, just as a reference to yourself to maybe look those up later. And then the last thing that can be really helpful to utilize are the margin spaces. So on these notes, this is your margin space. Fill this with anything you need that kind of helps you with your learning. So maybe that's doodling. Maybe that is writing down questions that you have or things that the article brought up. Absolutely, we're going to use that space to maybe clarify or make some connections to the content that we're learning. So maybe it's January and we're reading an article and you're making connections to Unit 3. So you might just jot that in the margin, or Newton's laws, or just little things that help you connect the article we're reading to the physics that we're doing in class. All right, so at this point, I'm going to ask Coach Jansen to pause this video for about 10 minutes. While it's paused, you are going to go through and annotate your article. So again, the things you must do are number your paragraphs, circle vocabulary or key terms, underline any claims the author makes, and to highlight those main ideas. The others are options or just other ways that you can work through your work. When you're done, and the cue to move forward is that you are going to open up your Chromebook and you're going to go into Canvas and open up the Critical Reading in Science assignment. And then after 10 minutes on the next slides, I'm going to explain what your 2 activity options are and how to do them. All right, now that you've read through your article and you've made your annotations and you marked up your text, the next thing we want to do is talk about how do we process and organize our thoughts from that reading. So the reading is your input. These next 2 activities are what we're going to call your output. So throughout the year, I'm going to give you different strategies and tools to use. In the beginning, I'm going to ask you to specifically use them, and then as we get through and deeper into the year, and you have things to choose from, you'll get to pick the ones that work for you. So today I'm going to talk about 2 different strategies. You only have to choose one of them for your article, and they're both available. There's a template on the Canvas activity. So you're not doing it both. Again, just pick one. One thing you may notice is that I have this set up in, again, sort of a Cornell note format. I have a body of my notes here. We'll talk about this on Friday. This is your body. This is your margin space, and then this will be our summary block at the bottom. So I'm going to walk through a strategy. This first strategy is called news. So the first part of news is N, or noteworthy. So noteworthy is going to be where you kind of summarize the important gist of the article, maybe any important claims that the author made or an explanation of their purpose. Why are you reading it? Why is it important? And what is the author's goal? The next part of news is the E, and E is for evidence. So we use noteworthy to define the purpose, the claim, or the goal. E is where you're going to put or note any of the evidence that the author gave in support of that goal. So depending on how you annotated your notes, you underlined the claim, that's going to go under noteworthy, and you highlighted big ideas that may play into evidence. You also maybe bracketed data, and you would give examples of that here. The next piece is the W, and the W is the why does this matter to me? So this is where you're going to make some personal connections to the article. Maybe the research, you're reading the one today about nose cells and COVID-19. How does that apply to you in your everyday life? So it's just a space for personal connection. And the last piece is the S. The S is for science connection. So today you are reading science articles. So in this case, that science connection may be connecting to things you've learned in previous classes. Maybe it's something from biology or chemistry, or maybe even something you learned in middle school. So you're connecting to previous science knowledge. In a different article, maybe if we gave a current event about something completely unrelated, I'm asking you to find the physics. The science connection is where you would do that. So you would be referencing specific things about how this article about texting and driving relates to momentum. So you're making those connections to the content. And then in the Cornell note format, and in a lot of the things that we do, we're going to end with a summary. So to me, a summary is not a book report. It is not a 3-paragraph overview of the entire article. I would prefer that your summaries be about 3 sentences long. The idea is if later when you have a conversation with some people in the class, if you give them the summary of your article, you're giving them a quick overview about what it's about, maybe sharing something that was important to you, and that's it. You're kind of leading them to perhaps read the article themselves or to ask you questions, but you're not telling them everything. So again, 3 sentences, short and concise, and to the point. So this is news. This is one of the 2 options you have for today, and this is something you could use later on in another article. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is something called read and recall. All right, the other option that you have for processing strategy or output for the article that you read is what's called a read and recall. So this is where having those page numbers is going to come in handy, because the first thing that you're going to do, again, we're really just focusing on the paragraph numbers that are content dense. So not the intro, but a paragraph that gives you information. So you're just going to do maybe paragraphs 1 and 2 combined, 3, 4, maybe 5 and 6 go together, and so on. So what paragraph does that information come from? The next thing that we're going to look at is this read column. And the read is a little bit confusing, I guess, but this is where you're going to describe what questions the author is answering. And in the description, it does say something about a level 1 and a level 2 question, which we'll talk more about a little bit later. But one easy way to think about it is the who, the what, the when, the where, and maybe a little bit of the why. So questions the author might be answering is, what is dark matter? Or how do you determine the degeneration rate of a hearing cell? So within kind of thinking backwards. So the author wrote the paragraph in order to answer these types of questions. And then the next column is called recall. So recall is you digging back into your brain. So if the read is the question that the author answers, then the recall is the space where you are giving the answer. So it's not you copying down information from the text. It's really just you processing through and thinking and giving the answers to those questions in your own words. And then once again, we're going to end with a summary. And I would prefer those be 3 sentences, short, sweet, and to the point. Again, if you were going to give someone a quick overview, this is what you would give them. So between these 2 strategies, between news and critical reading, you are just going to pick one of them. Whichever one that you feel fits this particular article or the article that you read better is the one that you're going to complete and then submit to Canvas. At this point, we're going to pause the video and we're going to give you about 10 minutes to complete your processing activity, so news or read and recall. And then you're going to submit this to Canvas via the Google Drive option. You are not uploading a file and you are not giving me the website URL to your Google Doc. We've authorized our Google Drives, and so when you click Submit Activity, I think it's the 3rd tab over, it will say Google Drive, you'll pull your file, and you'll submit that in. Once you're done submitting, towards the end of class, hopefully we'll have some time where you can talk with a small group of people, ideally those who read different articles than you, and you're just going to quickly share your summary and maybe something interesting that you learned. When we're done with this, I'll resume and just kind of wrap up by explaining what our flipped classroom situation is going to be. All right, so what I learned on Monday and Tuesday after doing the same lesson 10 times is that I am just never going to be able to do the same lecture 10 times. And so we had always planned on flipping the classroom, which means that you get the lecture and take the notes at home on your at-home days, and then we do the work and the labs and all that in class. So that was always the plan, though initially I thought I was going to kind of ease you into it. But it occurred to me that, 1, it's driving me crazy already. And 2, it makes the most sense to work on learning how to function and be effective in a flipped classroom if we start at the beginning when the content is a little easier. So not this coming week, this next week you're going to do a lab. But when we're done with that lab and we officially start Unit 1, you'll be getting a lecture video, which is a couple of guiding questions to answer. We'll come in the next day and use our class time to kind of review that quickly. We may do a small group discussion of sorts, and then we're going to move into a vocabulary exercise. So the lecture you take at home will prep you for that lesson. I am sorry that I couldn't be here with you today. Like I said, we're at the cross country meet. Thank you, big thank you to Coach Jansen for stepping in for me today. And I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday.